Welcome to the first episode of The Brain Jar. The title is a work in progress, but essentially this is going to be a Counter-Strike 2 podcast, and occasionally when we go back in time, we talk about things from the past. It'll be a Counter-Strike Global Offensive, generally about the esports scene. Sometimes in general, we can always mix it up. We can always spread the field of what we can talk about here, but essentially this has been inspired by, all sorts of podcast as Counter-Strike shows that I've been watching and will continue to be watching. So inspiration, credit where credit is due. Snake and Banter, Hot Take Point Made, By the Numbers, of course, a classic. Talking Counter in recent times. All of those kind of brought this idea into my mind. The idea that I've got something to say. And, you start as a guy who just watches the esport. You start as a tweeter, someone who just says the words. There's not really any stake to a tweet. You can always delete it, post whatever you want. And I've recently, within the past year or so, made articles around once a month, but those haven't necessarily been my thoughts so much so as an idea and a premise put to test and put into action. And I've always wanted to kind of say spicy opinions, say kind of hot takes. It's always fun to throw a little bit of caution to the wind and say what you want to say. But there's also this, and this is maybe a little bit very a tangent-esque type of show. I've got kind of a Cliff's Notes type of thing that I'm reading off of, but most of it is going to be off the top of my head, experimental. And you may like it, you may not like it. That's fine by me, give it a try. The original premise kind of was like this idea. This is an unrelated idea, but I'll tie it into it, is that the 99.1 kind of percent rule of a community, whether it's online or otherwise, I think is that, I'm not sure where this is from, but 90% of the people in the community just participate in it, but don't contribute in any way. They don't comment, they don't interact, but they just watch. Kind of, that's the general gist of kind of CS esports. You can see it by the numbers. You got like 1 million viewers for a tournament like Headovitz, but you don't have 1 million people commenting, right? And so the 9% of those million are the people who upvote, comment, like, reply to tweets. They participate in some way. And then you have the 1% kind of who create. They make some sort of content. They might write an article, they might make a YouTube video, they might participate, and then you can kind of divulge that further. You can go like 0.1% are players, 0.0, whatever. You can continue it as you want. But from there, I kind of thought of, how can I apply this percentage-based idea to the opinions that I might have on Counter-Strike esports as a whole, right? And I put this approach to kind of an initial idea is a 90, 50, 10. Kind of 3 tiers of stakes or opinions, something like that. Something that's 90%, something that's 50%, something that's 10%. It can be about 90% true, 90% false. It's about the perception of the opinion, It's something where the 90% take should be something that 90%, most people should kind of accept this without really having to grapple with it in their mind. They should hear what you say and they should be like, yeah, you know what, that's like true. Basically, it's not like a truth, but it's like, I can accept it with I don't have to like come to terms with it. It's already like, you're standing on top of the hill. You don't have to climb up and make your case. Your case is made pretty much already. But I think it's also important, like a lot of hot take shows and opinion shows where you don't always say the obvious thing. And I think sometimes you should make room for an obvious thing as well as a non-obvious thing, which is, maybe that's novel, maybe it's not. We'll see how it goes, right? And then a 50% opinion, which is kind of something that can go either way. People can they can see where you're coming from, but then they can also, it's like a 50-50 chance that they agree with you, they disagree with you, and, we'll see. I might not have it exactly correct. Everyone's got a different idea of what people might agree with or disagree with, so we'll see how it goes. But generally it's supposed to be something that evenly splits like a community in kind of whether they think it's correct or not, whether they agree with it or not, something like that. And then there's the 10%, and these are all rough. It's supposed to be like, mild, medium, hot, like in a menu type of thing. Originally this was supposed to be like a CS menu. I was gonna call it like that, but then I decided to shift it and keep my branding, brain-based branding. Yeah, it's subject to change, but that is what it is. So a 10% take is something that's going to kind of really split the viewers, the fan base, make an opinion that isn't, and it's something that you really have to fight for and make your case, and that people they might hear you out completely and still be like, you know what, I don't agree with you, and that's perfectly reasonable. I mean, it may be unreasonable actually, but that's the point of making the opinion. Now, as you may see on this overlay, now first of all, me on the left, I'm currently quote unquote anonymous. I'm not. There's no face to it. If I have a guest who has a face cam, I may well consider, depending on the guest, if it's just some random person with a face cam, I'm not gonna divulge my identity just for a random person. But if it's like a noted, journalist or just a person in the space, I don't expect that to happen like in the immediate future. But we don't know how long this will last, right? So if that happens, I have absolutely no problems. I added this to the About Me section of my Substack, which I assume I'll have it linked down in the description. But if I don't, hopefully somehow I've linked to it somewhere. Please, hopefully I remember this. But essentially, I have no problems with revealing my face when the time comes. But, there's no reason to stake that as it happens immediately. Let's let it bubble for a bit. I would rather reveal my face if it's going somewhere. If it's not going anywhere, I don't want that to just be on the internet for no reason. The future is always undecided. And speaking of the concept of the guest, there's room for one guest on this overlay, but of course, that's easily modified. I can add multiple guests. We can have a panel discussion. I'm 100% open to all of those concepts. Co-host, even a long-term co-host, a more consistent guest. That's something I'm open to, send your inquiries in Discord or on Twitter. I'll have the Discord for my Discord linked below. So if you want to join that, feel free. And the general gist is it can be current events in esports and CS, historical takes who was the best or whatever, future predictions. It's just all dependent on your choice, right? And the current status of everything is subject to change, but that's just how it is. So without further ado, not every podcast is going to have this kind of intro for it. I just wanted, for the first episode, you want to set out what you want the podcast to be like, because you at least want people's criticisms, to be based in what your vision is. If people criticize something and it's just unrelated to your vision, it's just a criticism that's you sound dumb. It's okay, well, that's not related to you. But if it's I think your framing is incorrect for your, organization of your podcast based on what you've said, then you can, apply the feedback properly. It helps to set out what you think is going to happen. Without further ado, let's start with the 90%. You want to start with the most palatable opinion and then build to the spiciest, right? So the 90% opinion is that ZywOo will be the number one player of 2024, HLTV number one specifically. Because I think you can always have your opinion who's really more impactful or whatever. But I'm going for the HLTV number one in 2024. And just to think about it in reverse order, who is really contending for the number one of HLTV next year, right? Because next year the calendar is going to be roughly the same as this year, because the Valve calendar changes and invite rules and all that stuff, partner league abolishment, takes place in 2025. So 2024, we're going to see pretty much the same as this year. And we already pretty much know that this year ZywOo is going to be the best. And you have to think about it in reverse. Who's going to take over that spot from him next year? You have kind of the fresh crop of CS2, although it's kind of hard to call these guys fresh because they're experienced and in some ways veterans, right? Depending on what you believe. Elite and Rops, kind of the CS2 riflers who've really broken out this coming season, right? The CS2 season that started just now. It's unlikely that they're going to find consistency as a rifle. Now, if we talk about them in order, Elite, I wrote him off personally, and I'm glad to be proven wrong. You always want to see veteran players and long-term players rediscover their talent, and especially with kind of the changing of the winds with CS2, it's nice to see familiar faces just to keep narratives in track, because if everyone's completely new, it's hard to really tell a story, you know what I mean? And the problem I have with Elite is, it's hard to find that much consistency at the top as a rifle. It's only really Nico, who's managed to keep such a top form as a rifle ever since Code Zero, all those years ago, was number one twice in a row. Since then, we haven't had a rifler number one, and we'll get into CS2 discussions later on, I'm sure. Because I have it in there, but you see what I mean. But another problem for Elige is that Complexity just don't have the team to bring him the results. So even if he's individually better, that's why I specified HLTV number one, because I just don't think they'll have the results and the trophies to bring him a number one placement. Like, at most, he might even get top 5, but number one, I don't think is actually ever possible with the scope of Complexity's lineup. And then we talk about Rops. Now, Rops is like a potential contender for number one based on results, because he's going to be in a phase lineup that, reportedly, no one is claiming that this phase lineup is splitting up because they're getting frozen, right? That's the rumor, then that's the report that's going around. And so I have to assume, based on nothing else, that if not that, then that phase lineup is going to stick together somehow. Unclear how ESL Valve rulings will let this conflict of interest with Complexity move into the future with the GameSquare acquisition, but we'll see how that unfolds. Current status, they have to be sticking together, because I don't know what else would be happening. And so another problem is Rops. First of all, his form has always kind of been up and down. He's never actually been the whole year the best. If you find at the beginning of the year, he was kind of rough, and then he came back, and then he had his downturns. And if he's in a phase team that has a team success view, it's also going to be harder for him to make the case that he's the number one player. And I just don't see Rops as the kind of player that is also going to strive for that. Because when you're a rifler, you really do have to strive for that kind of position. If you're like a Nico, then you need to strive for that position. Whereas if you're the AWPer of the team, CS2, Pika's advantage and rifler benefits notwithstanding, the positions naturally go to you. And I think with Frozen joining as well, it's not going to just be that Frozen's going to go take the bitch roles and be the worst player in the team. It's going to be that Frozen, Carrigan, and Rops are going to kind of figure out how to best make the team win. And that's going to be great for the team, but I don't think that that's going to necessarily that success is not going to translate to bringing Rops a number one. He can get top 10, 5, whatever, he's not going to get number one, in my opinion. Now, let's just go over some other candidates. Nico and m0NESY both are going to be stuck on G2 with their acquisition of Nexa recently to replace JKS. I'm not going to get into that now because, Australian bias, we're going to get really into the weeds with that discussion. But suffice to say, I don't think that team is really going to get a number one player. m0NESY, he can get close, but unless I don't see them breaking through in terms of results consistently throughout the year. And I also don't see m0NESY. If HooXi leaves as an IGO, which may happen or may not happen, say what you want about HooXi, he has kind of figured out some keys to activating m0NESY. And if he leaves, or if his impact and voice on the team is lessened, and it seems like when Nexa joins, kind of his voice has to lessen, right? Because Nexa is going to have a say in the team, and so m0NESY is not going to have, the most say that he did before, right? So it's maybe some people can say m0NESY can be number one, but I think he can be he can really be a top 3 player next year, but I don't think he can be number one. We're kind of eliminating ZywOo's competition here, right? Process of elimination. Donk's not going to have a good enough team. You can call him a generational talent or whatever. We haven't seen him play tier 1 teams on LAN yet, so I'm not going to call him anything but a prospect. And he just doesn't have the team right now. And even if he does, if he joins a better team, he's not going to be the best player to get the number ones. He's going to have some betting to do with the inexperience, so on and so forth. Simple, he's not in action right now, and even if he comes back, the motivation issues, he's going to need to warm up into CS2 next year. He's not going to be number one. That's just not going to happen, right? We know that Simple needs the hours to play really well, and that's currently not happening. So even if he comes back, he'll need time to get back into his own form. So that the fact that that's a question mark already tells you that it's just more likely, if we're sticking with a 90% branding, that ZywOo is going to be the number one player. So now let's get into ZywOo. We talked about all the people who could oppose him and how they don't really have the case to be made. But when we talk about ZywOo, we always talk about this idea, natural talent, born for Counter-Strike, born on the day of the game, stuff like that. But there is truth to how he's a natural talent rather than a grinding talent. And with IM Sydney, when he had those rough games, 4-map sample size, whatever, I didn't include him in my article about AWPers and how they play differently in CS2 because he just didn't have the sample size for me to justify including him in the article. And I didn't think it would be really fair to talk about how ZywOo is suddenly worse or whatever, and then call him an AWP abuser because A, he's not an AWP abuser in CSGO to begin with, and B, he didn't have the sample size then, and I believed he would probably come back. It would be irrational to believe otherwise because of his natural talent. And after his second CS2 event, he won the Blast 4 finals over FaZe, who was on that hot win streak, which was, bound to fail at some point, but you have to give credit where credit is due for defeating the hot streak FaZe, And ZywOo did, of course, have those carry performances that we know him for in Counter-Strike Global Offensive. And he's already talking about in interviews how he loves the game. He's embracing the differences. He's talking about how you need to change how you play with the AWP. You can't just treat it as it was. And, call this conspiratorial thinking or out-of-game factors, what you will, right? But when you put together the fact that he's a natural talent and not a grinder, and that he's going to be enjoying the game rather than having to grind and thus get the factors into your system. If he's already naturally talented at Counter-Strike 2, what's really standing against him, right? His team maybe, and we now can get into his team, which is another good thing for this specific opinion, is that Spinks, which is probably his best teammate right now on Vitality, right now he's getting into really consistent enough form to bring Vitality to kind of tier 1 success, right? But he's not necessarily good enough to overtake ZywOo for MVPs and for rating on his own team. And this basically means that Vitality, if we get into the lineup, we talk about Mezzi replacing Magisk. Now, of course, you can't really replace Magisk, but the team is really set up for success. Mezzi and Apex can kind of be a brain trust for the team, with ZywOo also he said he's getting a bit of an ego. I'll choose to believe in it when he starts really talking smack. But, even a little bit of an ego is good enough for ZywOo, right? Because he really hasn't been talking about his ego that much. And, every little incremental improvement to his game is already adding on top of a really strong base. People got kind of overzealous with ZywOo, comparing him to Simple because he doesn't have the resume in Counter-Strike Global Offensive, but I'm taking CS2 as a complete reset for Legacy in CS2, unless you're talking about a broad narrative across games. So when I talk about the best player of CS2, I'm not considering Simple at all. He hasn't played a single game. As far as I'm concerned, he's as good as Hooksy, individually speaking. He has no legacy, he has no stake in the game yet. So I can't consider him. And so when ZywOo is the player that you consider, right, when 2024 is over, who's really going to be in the team that can win as a player that can have the performances to get the MVPs to win, put up the stats, get the results, everything just adds up, Apex seems to have done a good job bringing this lineup together. I'm sure this is not really a Vitality-focused take, but you need to bring in Vitality here, and they've already won the LAN in CS2, and they're only going to get better as Mezzi gets bedded in. Maybe not individually, but if he brings in the team kind of dynamic, it's important to note that ZywOo already won the major with, Spinks, Magisk, Dupree, but if Flames can get consistency, which he can now that he has to fill in the roles and the gaps that Magisk has left, it's important to note that people think that Magisk is leaving a gaping hole that's unable to be filled by one player, but Apex already noted himself in interviews, and Flames' performances speak a little bit to this effect. He carried that Vertigo game against FaZe, and it's important to note that you fill the roles and the presence of a player, not just with one player, but together with Flames and Magisk together filling this gap that Magisk left. And if they can do that together, which I believe they can, because Flames was an individual talent on OG, you can say that he didn't really show the results, but also he didn't have a team to really show anything more than promise, but his individual skill was there. It seemed like there was some game sense, better than like other players that were building at the time. And now that he's being developed, around some experienced players, but there's also a lot of room for growth. You know what you're getting from players like Dupree, Magisk, and Apex, but now that you have Flames and Mezzi, who kind of still have potential, I still think Mezzi does have potential because he hasn't been to those top stages, right? So we don't know what he can bring at that point. All these factors to me point to ZywOo being the number one player because he's got the team for it. He's got the stats. He's got the role. He's already good at CS2. I see no reason that he can't AWP and rifle because that's already what he's been doing this whole year in Counter-Strike Global Offensive. And, to wrap this discussion up, there's just every other candidate has so many other question marks around them that you'd be hard-pressed to make a case for anyone but ZywOo. And, this is just the opening 90% opinion. So I think this is like a fairly reasonable take. Like, I don't know, most people would disagree with you. They would just say, yeah, but what about Monasteer? What about Nico? And you'd have to make a hot take case for it. It wouldn't be as clear-cut as ZywOo's stance is, in my opinion. And here's the next take, right? This is the 50%. The take it or leave it, maybe we can categorize it like that. Is that we've got the upcoming major, right? The first CS2 major in Copenhagen 2024 run by PGL. And my opinion is that this major is going to be the second most viewed CS event ever. So that means second to Stockholm 2021, which has like a 2.7 million crazy stat line. So I think it's going to be number 2. Not number 1, but number 2. And this is kind of tough because I could have gone crazy and said like, oh, it's going to attract insane viewership. It's going to get number 2, number 1. It's going to, but I don't think it's going to be that because that was like a perfect storm of factors for viewership, right? It was like every single factor aligned together. We'll get into those factors for viewership later on. But I think this opinion depends on where you stand with CS2, where you believe the status of the game will be, the bracket of the final, because that's where the viewership is going to be, where the teams are going to end up in. But I'm choosing to believe in it, and I'm going to put my stake forward here, right? CS2 is already playable enough for the major. I'm going to say it now. As it is now, it's playable enough for the major. We've had worse bugs and worse issues in majors to date. Present at actual majors, like we had the Olaf boost, which I mean it's technically not a bug, but compared to the kind of things that people are complaining about these days, it qualifies, right? And jump bugs and stuff at Krakow. And I mean, if you compare those kinds of majors to the kind of CS we're seeing now, we're seeing CS at many tournaments at LAN, and we're not really seeing like serious complaints about it to warrant considerations that it's going to present an issue. Just to quickly go over like, oh, but in CS2 it's going to be buggy. No, if anything, it's going to be a massive draw for viewership because it looks so good, right? And so a main problem, and this is where you can see my opinion kind of flip-flop either way and see if it shapes up or doesn't shape up, is that the team lineups are not really shaping up for the biggest viewership, and I'm going to openly admit this, which is why it's not a majority opinion, right? Furia bringing the Brazilian viewership, not really in the position to make a playoffs or even, bring people to support the tournament as a whole. They may not even make it to the playoffs whatsoever, and I think it would actually be impressive for them to make playoffs considering recent form. Although, as I'm recording this, they did win Elisa Masters Espoo. So, maybe they've got something there, but I'm not going to believe in them yet. And G2 brings big viewership, but right now is very hit or miss. Hard to see their future. They might make playoffs, but will they make like a semi-final or a final to bring the big viewership? Tough to see. FaZe are in limbo, but I'm going to believe that they stick together when Frozen joins. But I think FaZe is probably one of the better teams to stick to if you want to bring the viewership, right? Because they're going to stick together and then they're going to bring consistent viewership across all regions because everyone wants to watch FaZe. It's not really like a region-specific viewership. Another problem is that the CIS region, Russia, Ukraine, those like big viewership regions that we've seen teams like Na'Vi, Virtus Pro in recent history really get big viewership. It's tough right now because Na'Vi is an international roster now. They may not retain the same viewership. They've only got Bit and Wonderful now instead of Simple. And Simple is like a huge pool for viewership just overall, right? Especially on a major. And C9, I don't even want to talk about that roster right now. That's its own like video, 1 hour long video about what the hell is going on with Cloud9, right? Like the Boomiches, the IGL, they have no Orpa. Boomich is the IGL and Orpa. What is going on? Are they going to make a playoffs? Maybe. Are they going to make the final? No, really. Like, so the viewership from that region is, something we've relied on, especially like talking about Stockholm, how it got so many views. Navi was in the final. Navi was on, historic form. When you look at, I put a win streak video in, they won my win streak article, sorry. When they won that major without dropping the map, people were really tuning in when that, nuke game went to overtime. And was it? Yeah, when they made, if I'm remembering correctly, that Navi made the comeback to deny G2 the chance of a third map, right? I remember people just going crazy on social media who had never watched CS before, because it was just the absolute perfect storm of popular names in G2 and Navi, and popular regions, historic names like Nico and Simple, where you've heard of them even if you don't really know CS that well, old viewers, new viewers, and all of those combined to give the insane viewership post-COVID, first land back, stuff like that. But we're not going to really keep that kind of viewership perhaps, but I think the first CS2 major should retain a novelty that people are really underestimating. And I think this is a point where people really are missing the actual crucial point, because they're fans of CS, and so they don't realize that the major audience and the normal CS2 viewership has very little overlap than initially people may believe. The major brings in a very different pull from other esports, other ventures of gaming, like other gamers from games. Saying the word gaming a lot there, but people who just look at what's going on in CS through the in-game menu, the cosmetics. There's potential for Valve to bring in like a different set of cosmetics. And I wouldn't use this as an extra supportive point, because I think they'll be working on like actual content at that point. But you can think of that as like a potential pull, but I'm not gonna like rely on it. And now, talking optimistically about the lineups, is that Vitality is in a great position. They're going to bring good viewership. FaZe is in a good position wherever they go, like org or otherwise. Carrigan is going to bring the numbers. This rumored Liquid lineup is where I'm going to stake a lot of my claim, because it's got insane potential to bring the numbers to the major. Cadian brings good European viewership and hate watchers, by the way. Very important group of viewers, hate watchers. You keep the industry going, Shout out Maui Snake, shout out Kassad. You hate them on Twitter and you quote tweet them, but then you watch their segments and then they get the viewers, right? So it's necessary for the industry, and you can keep complaining about it, but your complaining is you're helping the, hamster wheel of the entertainment industry in esports have a little bit of spirit and hope, right? So Cadian brings that element. NAF and Twists can bring North American viewership. Skulls is kind of, the question mark, but if they succeed, he can really... Team Liquid already has good Brazilian viewership because Fallen joined, and so if Skulls joins, you can really get the co-streamers and bring the numbers in that sense from South America. And then this may be a stretch, but Yekindar does bring some level of CIS viewership. He does have fans from that region from his time in VP and, Pro 100. Shout out to Pro 100, because I did watch him in that team actually, and he was pretty good there back in the day. And that's a stretch, but I'm actually going to believe it. And here's another pro point. With MR12 and CS2, the level of CS is currently maybe at a low, even compared to what CSGO was like at the end, right? I'm a proponent in believing that the level of CS2 is actually, it's just different, maybe not necessarily worse back when Go was happening, right? But I think I can appreciate that it's definitely harder to watch than it was maybe in 2019 and 18, right? Comparatively speaking, for people who have watched it for a long time. But, and hear me out here, I think that as a result of CS2 bringing closer matches, because of the relative level of every team being kind of in the same ballpark, you're going to end up with closer games, close matches, overtimes, and the odds for a big viewership game go up insanely when there's close matches. Because the level of the game is something people who watch a lot are concerned with. And you're going to watch anyway. That's a guarantee, right? the type of people who are going to complain that the level of CS is low, they're watching each game. That's how they know the level of CS is low. It's because they're watching every game and comparing it in their mind. So you're going to watch anyway. So your opinion is not really relevant here. But the close games are where the people who are not interested in CS necessarily come through, you know? Like a historic game and a close game, like I'm going to talk maybe out of turn, but I watched the League of Legends, like, Worlds tournament, the grand final, just because of the whole Faker storyline. You know, I know nothing about the game. I don't know what I'm looking at when I see it, right? I've got like 10 hours in Dota and I get flamed in unranked games. That tells you what you need to know, right? But I still watched it and I still tuned in, so I counted as a statistic for the viewership because I was hearing from people like, oh, Faker's gonna win some historic thing. I was like, you know what? I've got some spare time. Let's just put this on the monitor and let's see what's going on. And that kind of thing is way more likely when close games are happening or when historic games are happening. And close games are something you can actually predict because of the lower level, right? And a CS2 novelty is going to be entertaining. It's going to look graphically more visually appealing for people who don't necessarily normally watch Counter-Strike. CSGO, people don't like to admit it, right? Because everyone plays it and everyone wants to say that they're playing a good game, right? But it really looked like ass. Like, if you look at the smokes now compared to what they looked like before, you launch up Global Offensive, you look at a smoke, you launch a smoke and you throw up. It's disgusting. Let's be honest, right? And as a result of that, that's another thing that brings in viewership. It's a good arena. The in-arena viewership, the atmosphere is going to be very good. PGL, you can say what they want about the audio, but when it comes to the final, generally the production is actually fairly consistent. You know, their first days, people are going to complain about it, but that's not where the viewership is anyway, right? It's going to be fairly good in the arena. It's a good arena setup, as we know. And seeing as Blast is not going to run their setup next time, maybe you get some tips from there. That's a cope, you know, but that's, you know how to set up a good arena there. It's going to be sold out. Unlike Blast never really sold out their arena. They just claimed they did and kind of turned the top seats down. But PGL is going to have that thing sold out for sure because it's got a lot of pools and a good region for people to show up. It's going to be a different crowd than the usual Australia super fans who are going to not cheer for all the teams. I think it's going to be a more, you know, general audience like the Antwerp major was. And as a result, I think this is a 50-50 take because it can really go either way. Because you're going to either believe that it turns out as a super powerful event or that the brackets don't line up, the production sucks, the CS2 doesn't bring in viewership, it flops like against like 1 million barely and it's just forgettable as a first major and then we build from there. But I think it could really be a monumental major. Not better than like the aligned stars of Stockholm, but I think it could really bring in a powerful audience due to CS2. And I'll put this out here, right? A lot of, just as a related tangential point, people forget that this is another deadline that Valve are working with. This is the actual concrete deadline. People, you know, they had that summer 2023. Everyone was like, summer 2023. And that was optional for them, but they did manage to put it. And the reason that they wanted to push it out and get rid of Counter-Strike Global Offensive and really focus on CS2 and send it out there for everyone to play, even if it's not in a perfect state, is because of the major. Because they know that you have to have, you know, if you're going to release CS2 in an unfinished state, you don't want to have a major for it, right? That's why this major, this season doesn't have a major. They ran the stickers for an extended period of time for Paris, partially intentionally. I'm going to choose to believe it's intentional because they really wanted to give the teams the extra money. And I mean, listen, you asked team owners, you asked like, you know, I think Nato or HLTV confirmed talking about stuff like this is the sticker money from Paris was monumental, like nothing like the other majors. They just sold and sold and sold because people kept buying, right? And I think that's the Valve actual deadline for CS2 being the marketable product and the finished product for the major. That's where the actual deadline is, because you can't have an unfinished product for the major. People have sold the tickets already. People are going. You can't have a, you know, shit game, quote unquote, at that point. And that's part of what I'm relying on for my case, right? So I'll just put that out there. So that's my 50-50 point. You know, you can agree or disagree, but I think it's a good case either way. And I can choose to believe, I can flip-flop, but that's my position, is that it's going to be the number 2 viewed event in CS history, second to Stockholm Major, run by PGL as well. And here's my 10% take, my unpopular opinion, my hot take, right? This is maybe, there's a few hot takes within this hot take, but let's start it here and pay attention to the wording, right? CS2 is already a better game than CSGO. And I'm saying game specifically to rule out a lot of the common counter arguments that are going to get pulled up here, right? People are going to bring up things like the missing game modes. Where's my war games? Where's my flying scoutsman? Where's my arms race? People are going to bring up things like anti-cheat. Valve, please, just 100,000 spinners in my latest Premier game. This means CS2 sucks. These are unrelated to the actual game itself, right? This is unrelated to the actual, like, you know, smokes, how it feels, how it looks. These are like one layer separated from the game. These are like out of game factors almost, if you think about it that way, right? And with the latest fixes, connecting the animations and the quote-unquote feel to the sub-tick system, right? And let me say, people love to talk about how, oh, CS2 feels off. Oh no, it feels a little bit off. Oh, my feelings, you know. This game is just a little bit, oh, I miss CSGO. The game is already at a base state better than CSGO was at. Not even at the beginning. It's better at a base state than CSGO was at 2023. The legacy version that we ended CSGO is better than that already. I'm telling you now. Go was buggy in many ways. People forget about it because they love to complain about what's new, and CS fan base is notably the least, you know, enjoyable of change. They're so resistant. They're so, you know, stagnant, fragile, some would say, right? And stuff like the HE behind the smoke to give you vision that shouldn't have been there. Randomly seeing people through smokes with mollies. You know, some mollies spreading when they shouldn't have spread. Smokes not popping when they should have popped. FPS bug in pro matches when you have to press record in the console to fix it. Common bugs that we just took for granted, like, didn't even think about as part of the game. We just like, okay, yeah, that's just the game we love. But right now in CS2, what are the notable bugs, right? When there are bugs that fix within a time frame that's never really been seen before in this history of Counter-Strike, like, ever, right? We had that, you know, plus attack, you know, the machine gun spray of the AK when you use the console command. That was fixed. We had killing behind walls. You know, that's been notably reduced. Maybe not completely removed, but, you know, that's just something that's going to be a work in progress for a while, and it's definitely in a better state than pretty much all of Global Offensive's feel, right? And when I say this, I'm going to mention this later as well. But separate the concept of Counter-Strike 2 and Counter-Strike Global Offensive as different games, right? And then you get to where I'm really thinking of. And we haven't even talked about the graphics and how it looks. And that's unbelievable. I mentioned how I throw up on looking at CSGO smokes now. It's unbelievable how good this game looks on max graphics, especially with the remade maps. And as the maps get remade and the old maps get remade and we don't play with like the, you know, touchstone converted maps, basically, like Mirage, Dust 2 or whatever, as soon as we start shifting from those get remade, the game just looks absolutely fantastic. It's really, you know, strikes a balance between looking like Counter-Strike and looking like a modern game. Like, I'm not going to claim it's some sort of an Unreal Engine 5 demo, looks absolutely beautiful, but now people, you're not ashamed to show it to someone and then they just go like, oh, is that Counter-Strike? Is that game from 20 years ago? No. This is like it's like modern game, you know? You can actually show it to someone. And here's the kicker, right? The HE smoke mechanic. It's the perfect combination of depth without detracting from the core mechanics of the game. The smoke mechanic, shooting through smokes, isn't game breaking, but it provides just that little like 1% like fine tuning that gives a little bit of like feel and atmosphere to the game while not removing the skill elements completely. HE smoke mechanic, initially they tuned it down from being a huge remover of the smoke. Now it removes it much less, but it's still very notable. You see it in pro games and you see it in your own games, but you don't instantly think about the HE as a tool to remove the smoke. It can also remove the smoke. The same way a smoke can also extinguish a Molotov. It's an additional tool. And I like that. It's really fine-tuning the details of Counter-Strike in a way that iterates upon Global Offensive in how I think is pretty much a guaranteed upgrade, right? And here's where we get into the unpopular discussion of Pika's advantage, right? Oh, very scary word, Pika's advantage. People are really getting crazy with it. You know, the Ferrari P going absolutely insane. Riflers are better. AWPers are nerfed. AWPers dead. Please fix. Here's what I'm going to say. Somehow, Jame is still really good at CS2. Jame, the most, notably passive player, AWP abuser that you'd love to call him, like, abusing the mechanics of passive play in Counter-Strike Global Offensive. Somehow he's just really good at CS2. You check the stats, he's up there still. He's changed how he plays a little bit. He's a little bit more proactive on CT sides. His T side calling is a little bit different. His buy mechanics are a little bit different in how he plays with his team, but he's still good. And so let me tell you what that tells me. Tells me that it's a skill issue on some of the people who are not adapting in the game, right? Now, it's my opinion that CS2 is better than CSGO. You can like how it was before, right? Fact of the matter is, it's not coming back. The majors are going to be in CS2. Everything's going to be in CS2. We're going to see CSGO in show matches for the foreseeable future. Get ready for the insufferable CSGO show matches as the gimmick. That's a side note, right? But somehow, Pika's advantage, oh no, it makes AWPing impossible. But somehow, ZywOo, Monacy, and Jame, they're all just chilling. They're all able to AWP. And I know, Monacy and ZywOo are rifling, right? But let me tell you, Jame is still AWPing pretty much the way he did before. Especially, at least on the online events that he's played so far. Maybe things are going to change, right? But players have mentioned in interviews, Rops and ZywOo, I think come to memory first is that you do just have to change some of how you play and not be too attached to the game CSGO. Because it's a remake from the ground up based on CSGO, taking pretty much everything from there. But now we're iterating on a completely new game. Now that we've put CSGO in the legacy build, it's in the beta branch, you have to opt into it. CSGO is no more, effectively speaking. Apart from like the skin stuff, cosmetic stuff that's going to be like backported because there's, people are going to complain too much. The sticker doesn't look so good. I'm one of them, by the way. I made a cum craft on Mike 7. It doesn't look like cum anymore. Valve, please fix. Anyway, but that's not the point. The point is that CS2 is its own completely new game. It's going to have different feel. Rops and ZywOo and other pro players, JL maybe notably, talked about how you need to change how you play. You need to feel the game in a different way. And that's just how it will be. People are complaining too much because they're comparing CSGO and CS2 with the frame of mind that CS2 should be CSGO. And that's just incorrect, both objectively and subjectively for you, right? Objectively, it's not the same game. It plays different, mechanics are different, feel is different. So if you're going to compare it like that, with the frame of reference that it should be like CSGO, you're going to immediately fail. Because it's not going to be like CSGO ever again. Because we're not going to go back. We're only going forward. And this is another problem, right? People have played so many hours of CSGO, right? So that when they go into CS2, you're playing against your own body, muscle memory, your own mind. Your neurons are just wired perfectly to CSGO in ways that you don't consciously understand. And so it feels wrong. But as soon as you try and rewire and change your framing, let me tell you, players are doing it. Professionals who have played more than you have are doing it. So I promise you can probably do it too, even if you're older than them and you played like hours and hours. Like, if you can adapt from 1.6 and Source to Go, you can adapt from Go to 2. Stop complaining. That's all I'm saying, right? Another thing I'm going to note here is that I'm focused a lot on LAN and low ping gameplay. Full disclosure, I hardly play any high ping gameplay because I'm on, Australian servers, Sydney, Melbourne servers. Sub 20, sub 30 ping. Pretty much everything is perfect down here, right? Because you don't get a high ping game. You're within the same region. But I'm going to say this. Why should Valve optimize for high ping first? Why, right? Why does it make sense to support people playing with high ping over optimizing, keeping the purest form of LAN CS and low ping CS smooth, right? When you think about it that way, if you have like 70, 80, 90 plus ping when you go into that territory, you're already automatically at a disadvantage by default, just as the nature of physics and how your interactions and your instructions are going to be sent to the server. That's just a fact of the game. There's only so much you can do to counter that, right? And you can say it feels worse or it feels better or whatever. Maybe the updates have changed that. But I don't, and listen, this comes from a place of empathy because a lot of, Asian teams and stuff are scrimming with high ping on Europe. They're playing like international tournaments online and struggling through it. But the reality is the game is not made for that. It's a consequence of the international global scene that we have, that we end up with these edge case situations. It's not something that really should be optimized for or considered when you're talking about game. So if you're complaining about the game kind of sucking for you on high ping, I can't include that in my analysis, and I can't really tell, be like, Valve, please fix that, because I would rather they focus on actual main game content or whatever than try and optimize for like an edge case, essentially what is an edge case, right? So that's basically what I think about CS2. I think peak advantage is maybe they'll tune it down a little bit. That's to be seen, right? But I would let this game play out. People saying it's better on LAN. There's not the overblown outcry of Pika's advantage has honestly stopped, right? It's not something I see every day anymore. So which tells me people are getting used to it day by day. And they don't want to, like, this is another thing with people like social media and pro players and everything like that. They never want to admit when they were wrong, right? Me too, right? That's just human nature. But admitting, like, when you complain about Pika's advantage and the game being different, and then when you play like your 500 hours that you've played already, your 1,000 hours if you're a grinder like Monacy, I don't know, you could probably have done that by now, and then you feel like, oh, you know what, it's different, but it's not actually like horrible, like it's just different game, and I'm enjoying myself playing this game. But you don't want to be like, guys, I was a bit too fast when talking about Pika's advantage being overblown. We call off the, outrage. You don't want to tweet that, you just want to play, and then like in like 2 years you'll be like, I love CS2. I was wrong back then, and then now when everyone agrees with you, you bring out your opinion. But I'm just gonna say, like, I would say it now, CS2 is better than CSGO as it stands. By the way, just to be clear, I'm not glazing on Valve. There's missing features, there's questions, there's concerns, there's problems with CS. Like, we got a lot of, we're waiting on further info, but clearly they're working on the game every few days, every week. We're getting patch notes, we're getting updates. They're listening and they're watching and they're paying attention. You know what I mean? Like, you should give feedback based on what's actually happening. You shouldn't pretend that they don't care about the game. You should at least, frame your criticism in a reasonable place. That's how I'll end that. And yeah, that's my, 10%. I think 10% is probably generous. That's probably a 1% opinion. People really don't like CS2 that much to the point where they think it's better than CSGO. But I'll say it if no one else is going to say it, So that's the end. I'll give a little bit of a conclusion segment here. Obviously, the show was a bit short for now. As I say short, we're coming up on 48 minutes. But, 7 minutes of that was an intro. So around 40 minutes. Kind of short for a podcast, but with no guest, it's kind of funny with it. But with a guest, you can expect this to be more than twice as long, to be honest. Because they're going to bring their own 3 points. There's going to be open discussion. There's going to be tangents, etc. But I think 45 minutes for one person speaking constantly, like, this is basically no cuts. Like, you have to give me some respect for being able to speak just straight, unfiltered brain dump onto the mic like this. It takes something. Listen. So I'm open to guests coming on. If you're listening to this and you think I could vibe with this, or maybe I can come on your podcast. That's like a possible outcome. I'm currently just a guy, but I'm perfectly open, and I would love to be a part of that kind of thing. So if you've got thoughts, concerns, you want to join, you want to be a part of this, you want to hire me for something else, I'm not necessarily got too much of a portfolio yet, but I'm open to it, and I would say I've got the skill and the potential more than a lot of people. Maybe not a lot of people working, but maybe a lot of candidates, something like that, right? So if you did, and you enjoy the podcast, please do subscribe and, leave your comments and stuff, everything to help the algorithm. That's what I say in my normal YouTube videos. So just to comment on that, it's a different audience than what I'm usually catering to, I upload like a Super Autopets video every day. Obviously, if you're a CS player, you're probably like, what the hell is that? But I'm trying to keep everything in the same channel. I don't want to segment like unnecessarily, right? So if you do like this podcast, subscribe to me if you want, because I think that's just a sign of support. It's a sign of interactions. It's a small community, the people who watch a podcast all the way to the end. So I think it's something that people who do that should really stick together and kind of build that community, because that's how you keep everything. If you do want to talk about stuff, about CS, about esports in general, just about maybe even me, I don't know why you would, but if you want to, I've linked a join link to my Discord in the description below. I've got my Twitter, my Substack. Those are my 3 probably most important links for me, right? And yeah, I hope you enjoy the content, and we'll see what the feedback is like. I think I could probably crank these out at least once every 2 weeks, if not once a week, because I've just got a lot to say. I could spend like an hour talking about CS. I do it anyway, if no one's listening, so I might as well record it and put it out for the world. So yeah, any feedback, everything else, just leave in the comments and have a good time.